Today, I'm joined by my friend, Mai Lee, an associate director at the Millennium Challenge Corporation and a managing partner at Like Family. So Mai, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Jeremy. Happy to be here.
So Mai, for those who don't know you, as I've gotten to know you over the last few years, share a bit about where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Okay, well, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. metro area. I've lived here for most of my life. I even went to school at George Mason, so I stayed local when I went to college. And I got into IT just really by chance. I was studying psychology at George Mason, and my boyfriend, now husband at the time, was like, you need to get a summer job. And so I got a temp job because I had this incredible skill of being able to type really fast. And really, they just had me take a typing class. And I was placed with a local defense contractor, a pretty well-known defense contractor. And so over the summer, I temped at this defense contractor's help desk. And it was a really interesting experience. So my job was really just to do the level 1 intake at a help desk. So just picking up the phone and logging all of the trouble tickets for this defense contractor. And they were a 24-hour help desk. And that was really all that I did. I was like fairly computer literate, but over the course of that summer, they were really flexible because it was a 24-hour help desk, and I would sometimes work late into the evening, or I would sometimes take the overnight shift and nobody would call. So that gave me a lot of time to, number one, get my homework done because I was still in college at the time. Number two, socialize with the other people that were working at the help desk. And then sometimes we would also just indulge ourselves in our own personal interests. And, and I would get involved with what other people were working at the time. And I just so happened to be lucky enough to sit next to a young man that was around the same age as me, who was studying computer science. And at the time, I had no background in IT aside from doing email. This was in the late 90s. But he was studying computer science and he would talk to me about it. And I found it really, really interesting. So we had these long stretches of hours overnight where he would show me what he was working on or the projects that he was working on. And I just thought it was really cool. And in the back of my mind, I was just like, oh, well, that is so cool, because I find myself, although I am really interested in people, which is why I studied psychology, I love understanding people and learning about them. And I'm a nosy person, so I'm learning about people's personal lives and what motivates them and what troubles them. And I love to offer suggestions. My sister says that I am the most convincing person in the world. So I had this love of psychology, but the other half of my brain loves to do problem solving. And I love puzzles. I'm so good at Tetris. I love puzzles. I love word puzzles. I love problem solving. I love logic puzzles. It's kind of like similar to how you are, Jeremy, you love doing DIY projects around your house. I'm not a DIY person, but I love building things on a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. So I just really found it interesting. So this kind of sparked an interest in my brain. So as the summer progressed, it turned from a summer job into just a regular part-time job. Even when school started again, I continued to temp at this company. And eventually it turned into a full-time job. So they hired me. I was no longer temping there. And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, during the dot-com boom. And this was when companies were handing out big referral bonuses and And they were also like giving tuition reimbursement for like anything that you wanted to study. And so in order to pay for school, the company said, well, if you want to study, like to have a minor in IT, then we'd be happy to pay for all of school. So I was like,
Wow.
this is amazing. I want to take it, I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. And so I decided to keep my major in psychology, but minored in IT. And that's really where I got started. And the gentleman that I happened to sit next to, he became a really close friend. And as I graduated, and I still continue to work at this company, but after I graduated, they promoted me to different levels of the help desk, which then also blossomed into asking me if I knew anything about Lotus Notes, because at the time the company was using Lotus Notes for emails and like forms and things like that. And I was like, I think I could read a book about it and maybe learn it. And it was built, Lotus Notes is built on the Lotus Domino platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they said, hey, we need to build these forms. I was like, I'm pretty good at figuring these things out. So this was like a very small shop, and I was like the only person that was doing it. So when you don't really have anybody else to really rely on, you just end up figuring things out for yourself. And personally, I've always been a terrible student, but I think the way that I learn best is like just by, playing around and making mistakes. And so really that's how I learned how to start building things in Lotus Notes, which then turned into building things in Cold Fusion. So for that same company, I also built like a content management system so that people could, search for knowledge-based articles for that help desk, and which then led to connecting to APIs so that people could check on the status of their tickets. And then that turned into learning.net. So really, it was mostly all self-taught, but I've had a lot of, and I've had a lot of failures and mistakes, but all along the way, it's been totally fun. I love exploring things, and I feel as though like in the past 20 some years, I've gone from like being a one-man development shop, and this was before Enron, or before you had to have like two distinct teams of like operations and production people and development people. That, when I was working back then, it was just a developer that developed things and deployed things and, created the database and provisioned all the permissions.
Right.
And, I also have done, that also led me to do a lot of training. When you're a one-man team, you build something, you have to train people on how to use it. And it also led me to, patching servers and physically moving servers. And so I feel as though, it all started from when I was back in college, just by chance. I was around the right people. And I was also given the opportunity and the time and the space to just explore and learn something. And I know a lot of people don't have that luxury, but I did. And I'm really glad that I had that opportunity.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and throughout that, I mean, I know you're in this product manager role now. I imagine there's a lot of your psychology stuff that comes in handy dealing with both customers and getting internal operations people to listen to you.
Yeah. So I really feel as though I'm in like this very sweet spot right now, because I think I've sat on both sides of the fence where I've been a frustrated user of an application or a tool that is developed by somebody else. And I've also been a developer where, I've gotten requirements from some unknown entity, and it's just my job to build it. And, a lot of the times when I was just working as a developer, I had very little control over the things I got to build or do. It was really like, you get the requirements and you build it to spec, right?
Mhm.
So now I feel as though I'm at a place in my career where it's like the most important thing to me is being able to understand the user's pain points and then being able to make sure that the developers understand that as well so that they get a lot more context around why they should build things in a certain way. And I know that just from wearing my developer hat back in the day, like sometimes the developers, they have the solution, but they just don't have the full story, right?
Yeah.
So it's my job to like tell this whole story and have them understand the user experience as well. And it also, gives me this little bit of control over being able to choose what's the most important thing to focus on as well.
Wow. That's awesome. So you've been around now in the IT field for 20-ish years. So what's something you see that we do that if somebody came to you and said, today you get to make the big decision. What's something that's we do that's either frustrated you or you just think maybe we should reconsider that?
I think in general, when you think about IT, I think a lot of people think that it has to be totally technical. There are just so many different types of IT careers that don't necessarily require you to be technical. You don't have to have 20 years of development experience to break into the IT field. And I personally think that some of the best colleagues that I've worked with as of late were people that started out in something completely different.
Hmm.
So I think that IT hiring, really depending on, especially in the product management space, a lot of people talk about wanting to break into product or product management or product ownership, and they're intimidated by the fact that they don't have this background in development because a lot of developers, they want more control, so then they become product owners, right?
Mhm.
And I think that it's not necessary to have this very long and storied background in technology at all. I think the most the most successful people that I've worked with are people who have terrific soft skills.
Hmm.
They are great listeners. They can really connect with the customers because ultimately, if you're talking about just like development of an app or some sort of product, the most important thing is to satisfy your customers and address their issues or to create efficiencies in their lives. And so some of the people that I've spoken to as of late, they're intimidated because they don't have this certification or that certification. I don't think I don't think that if I were a hiring manager, that would be secondary to me.
Hmm.
What's really important to me is that somebody is a really hard worker. For one thing, they have to be very disciplined and they have to be able to connect to the customer. So that's what I would change in IT hiring is this perception that you have to have very, very strong technical skills in order to be successful in technology. You
Hmm.
don't. Especially when we're living in a world where people are building apps for other people. I think the most important thing is understanding who your customer is.
Absolutely. That's true.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right. There's been a lot of conversation in the IT field lately about what they call it gatekeeping, right? Are we even causing people who would otherwise be qualified for certain roles because we put those types of requirements? You must have a computer science degree or you
Right.
must have X number of years of technical experience. And I think you're right. That's something we absolutely need to reconsider because many of the roles we have in the IT field, and which is so huge now, aren't technical and don't necessarily require the same kind of analytical sciencey skills to get the job done.
Right. Right.
So where do you see yourself going in the future? I'm not, or where do you see, this product management field going into the future?
So I really love my job right now. So I'd imagine that at least in the near future, I'm probably going to stay in this area. But one of the things that I discovered, like in the second half of my career, because when I was working as a developer, one of the things that I spent too much time on was working on developing this timesheet application. And this was before I started working for the government. And it's just about as thrilling as it sounds, building out a timesheet application for several years. And it kind of led me to, I wouldn't call it a midlife crisis, but it led me to reflect on what was really important to me. And what it really boils down to for myself is what's important to me is that the work that I do supports a mission that is close to my heart, that I also support, right? And I need to be able to see the benefits of it. So, you know, I could have been building a timesheet application that could have been helping people like 10 hops down in the road, but it didn't feel that way to me. And I wanted to do something for the greater good. And I think I came to this realization about like 5 or 6 years ago. And when you think about somebody doing something for the greater good, you usually think of like doctors and social workers and nurses who are all incredible people. But I thought to myself, like, with my skills, what can I do to, you know, create a greater good for society or for people that I care about? And what it really led me to was looking into nonprofit and public service work, which is what led me to working within the government, specifically within the Peace Corps and then with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. So I do think that for folks who are, you know, early in their career, you may not have the luxury of like being choosy because you're still building up your skills, and you know, and a lot of folks will just take what they can get, especially in a competitive job market. But where I am in my career today, I think I kind of liken myself to somebody who has worked in a restaurant, who has like worked in every single role in the restaurant. I've washed the dishes, I've worked in the front of the house, you know, I've been the cook. I've done everything. I feel as though I've done like almost everything in IT. And so I really love where I am right now. It's a great personality fit for me, but where the organization that I work for also really matters as well. It has to be something that you know, I support. And you know, so I love working for the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I love working for the Peace Corps, and I hope, you know, in the future that I'll continue to support organizations like this, so that I could, you know, create a benefit to other people in this world.
Wow, what a great answer. Well, thank you so much, Mai, for coming on the podcast today. It's always a joy for me to catch up with you. Even though we work together, we don't always get a chance to talk.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for having me.